Marco wasn't superstitious. He was a night guard in 2018, the kind who laughed at ghost tours and tourists claiming they felt a presence. By 2 a.m., the Colosseum is stripped of its daytime tourist energy. It is locked, silent, and completely empty. But on one cold night during his final sweep, he heard a low rumble. It sounded exactly like a massive crowd gathering in the dark. For a skeptic who lived by logic, the math didn't add up. The gates were barred and the tiers were empty, yet the air was vibrating with the energy of a packed house. Marco walked cautiously toward the arena floor, shining his light across the ancient walls to find the source of the impossible sound. That low rumble exploded into a roar. He described it as a stadium erupting in bloodlust, the deafening sound of 40,000 people. Then came the screams. They pierced right through the crowd noise, high, sharp, and unmistakably human. Marco was standing inside the specific auditory footprint of a first-century Roman spectacle. That roar matches the arena's historical capacity of 40,000 people. Spectators were stacked vertically, creating a towering wall of humanity. The steep seating tiers acted as a psychological pressure cooker, funneling the crowd's noise downward onto the center floor. The builders engineered a structure that amplified collective frenzy and trapped the victims inside a physical wall of sound. Marco's experience escalated. The air grew thick, and he heard the sudden, violent sounds of metal clashing and beasts snarling. The fighters on this floor wore heavy, specialized armor and wielded brutal weaponry designed to prolong combat and maximize the visual spectacle of death. Beneath the sand lay subterranean corridors. Romans imported thousands of exotic animals, starved them in the dark, and unleashed them upward as living executioners. The games operated with systematic efficiency. This was an industrial-scale killing floor. Then came the final, most chilling sound. Marco heard a single man begging for mercy in a language he didn't recognize. This map illustrates the arena's victims. Most who died here were prisoners of war and conquered populations, funneled from the empire's outer edges straight into the capital. They were stripped of their identities and dragged thousands of miles from their homes, forced into absolute psychological terror before dying for a crowd's entertainment. Marco stood frozen, enveloped in an invisible, deafening war zone. And then, it cut to dead silence. The true, lingering horror of the Colosseum belongs to the hundreds of thousands of real human beings whose lives were systematically ended for sport. Marco reported exactly what he heard. His supervisor didn't blink. He just looked at him and said, "You heard what everyone hears eventually. This place remembers." Environments defined by industrial-scale agony retain a heavy psychological footprint. They rarely return to being simple, benign spaces. We see this in 20th century sites of mass death, where the horrific realities of industrial slaughter were systematically documented. Survivors like Primo Levi described a distinct psychological collapse within those camps, a lingering weight that permanently saturates the ground itself. Concentrated tragedy turns the stone itself into a witness, effectively embedding the trauma into the architecture of the physical space. Marco quit 2 weeks later, but before he left, he took one final walk through the arena, snapping a photo on his phone to prove to himself that the noise was all in his head. When he looked at the screen, he saw a shadow standing directly behind him, a shadow wearing armor. History refuses to fade quietly. In places built